I got all I want, and I got all I need, and I got everything. I got you and me. All I want, I got all I need.
Marriage is the best. Marriage can be extremely difficult as you are constantly being asked to sacrifice parts of yourself. You know, spending 20 minutes every day to connect and stay updated, spending money in order to go out on dates, spending time and stress on scheduling a weekend away, inviting stress into the world by being married, period, and allowing 1,000 conflicts to transform you. You know, you may very well find that hard, difficult feelings are a part of your journey. And I know that they've been a part of ours. And I know that a lot of my clients have had to carry very complex and difficult feelings, you know, and obviously men and women are different in the feeling department. And so sometimes men carry their feelings a little differently. You know, I think that there are even some stereotypes or tropes in our culture surrounding men and their emotions. I'm sure you could think of a few just right off the top of your head. Men don't have emotions. Men tend to stuff down their emotions. And, you know, just don't talk about it. Get back to plowing the field and move on. The ideas surrounding men and emotional unavailability and emotional compartmentalization. And there's a reason that those stereotypes are present. And I think it's important to acknowledge that men and women are very different in this area, albeit maybe less different than you might think. And there's a grave difference in the experience of emotion. Grave is a strong word. There's definitely a difference in the experience of emotion. Women tend to experience fear a lot more strongly and be driven by their fears and anxieties. And men tend to experience shame and inadequacy that kind of drive them, you know, inward, or drive them to express themselves in anger. So we're going to talk a little bit today about how the man's vulnerability in the area of shame and inadequacy interacts with the woman's vulnerability in the area of fear and isolation. So let's get started.
Marriage. Marriage is what brings us together today.
So most of the material that we're going to talk through today is found in the book How to Improve Your Marriage Without Talking About It, which is a phenomenal title. And, you know, it's kind of it's a gripping title. It's a little bit counter to what you would think would be helpful in marriage and marriage counseling, because how are you supposed to improve your marriage without talking about it? So this is Stephen Stosny and his co-writer, Patricia Love. And Stephen and Patricia highlight how talking about the relationship actually can undermine your ability to feel connected if you don't understand the vulnerabilities that live in your partner. When men are pursued to talk about their relationship, it is most often the case that they are being approached because something is wrong. They've failed in some way. They're falling short. And that message of you're falling short is a really potent, powerful message for a man. And that's something that I think that the feminine part of marriages, the more that you come to an understanding of that, the better off you're going to be in your pursuit of your spouse. The more that you understand the fact that men are incredibly vulnerable in the areas of shame and inadequacy, the more that you can understand your spouse's vulnerability, what he or she is bringing into the marriage, the better equipped you're going to be to respond to them, the more intimate and satisfied you're going to end up in your marriage. So a normal shame and fear kind of cycle would happen when, usually the wife has something to bring to their spouse. And if they use like a harsh startup, they can so quickly shut down the conversation by immediately striking at the vulnerability of their partner. Now, there's lots of good reasons why a woman tends to start those conversations. They have a superpower radar about kind of an early warning disconnection system because they are wired for connection through conversation, through quality time. And so when you're wired that way, your sense about whether you're connecting to your spouse or not is more in tune. Now, the male side of that, we're less wired that way. We're not necessarily wired for connecting in the same way. And so our early warning sign often doesn't spark in the areas of feeling disconnected. I have talked to and sat with many couples who the man will say, we're in a good place. And the woman might say, there's some things that I would like to be improved. And that happens very often. And the vulnerability that strikes at in the man is inadequacy. When we're faced with improvement, when we're faced with comments surrounding improvement, it's really easy for us to feel like we're not enough, like we're not doing enough, that what we are doing is unappreciated. And the shame surrounding those things kind of shuts down our ability to engage and connect and converse and share. The feminine side of this fear and shame cycle is the vulnerabilities of fear and isolation. Are you going to leave me alone? Am I alone? Am I going to be doing the responsibilities at the home alone? Am I going to be doing, am I going to be left alone in my emotions or in my distress or in my negativity? And so the woman will be triggered in some form or fashion to say, hey, I really need you to connect with me because I'm feeling this early warning sign disconnect and I don't want to be alone and I'm afraid. And the man will hear, you're not enough. You're not connecting with me. I need you to do more. And then they're off to the races of kind of moving apart, turning away from each other. In that process of turning away and fading, each part of the marriage is experiencing difficulty in their own vulnerability. So the wife, in her fear and in her isolation, reaching out and starting those conversations and engaging, which are good things, really great things. Continue to reach out, continue to engage, continue to, you want to do that. That's a beautiful part of femininity. But it has it has an unintended effect of creating inadequacy and shame in the spouse. So even though the intention isn't to create that, in fact, they're really asking for the opposite. They're asking for closeness. They're asking for pursuit or romance or time. And even just as I say that, I can remember times when Becca has asked me to pursue her, when Becca has asked me to romance her, when Becca has asked me for more time. And a lot of the times I struggle to respond well, in those moments, because as she's asking, the layers and the levels and the depths of shame and inadequacy that I feel are continuing to grow as she's asking me for these things. And in that, I have responded very poorly, especially before I knew that shame and inadequacy, those vulnerabilities, were causing so much of the emotional disturbance and negativity that I was experiencing. I would very often attribute her asks to either, I would defend myself against her asks by saying, this ask is it's an inappropriate ask. She doesn't recognize what I've done for her. She doesn't recognize all that I'm pouring out, the energy that it's taken to go and work and then come home and support her and take off the load from her and just pour into the kids. And she's asking for more because she doesn't understand. She doesn't get that I'm at the end of myself. And so this is an inappropriate ask. Like, she's asking too much. I used to feel that way a lot. Like, oh, I'm just being asked too much, because especially early on, if you listen to year 1 or year 2, you're going to find that we experienced a lot of stress in those early years, and that we didn't have all that much to give at one another in those moments. I didn't realize that she was experiencing vulnerability. To me, it felt like, the British are coming, or, the Greek army is about to hit the pass, and we have to go to war because I have to defend what I've done, and I have to defend how I've done it, and I have to defend what I've poured out, and I have to defend the energy that I'm giving, and I have to defend my work and my worth. And so going in that defense mode, I would become defensive. Yes, you guessed it. And in that defensiveness, I would have to try and protect myself from my shame, my vulnerability. I would have to protect myself from my shame and my inadequacy, because that's where I'm vulnerable as a man. Inevitably, invariably, indubitably, my wife would then she would be experiencing her vulnerability to pursue me. And then she would experience her vulnerability when I would get frustrated or angry or defensive when she's bringing up her needs or her desires, or even just like an ask to be more romantic or spend more time. It was very difficult to field those requests, especially early on in our marriage. And so it went really poorly. And so I think that if you're in that season where you're finding it difficult to either be heard in your requests or to receive your requests, placing the frame of shame and inadequacy and asking yourself, like, is this like where the rub? Is this what I'm experiencing? Am I experiencing the shame of feeling not enough and feeling inadequate and feeling like she doesn't see or appreciate me? And is that the thing that I'm responding to? Am I responding to her request, or am I responding to my shame? So the personal, right? And then, the vice versa, the feminine might ask, am I afraid? And am I expressing myself in a way that would display my fear and my isolation, or am I expressing myself in such a way that might come across as just, not good, not kind, not appropriate? Am I expressing myself in such a way that I'm just pushing him further away or exacerbating his vulnerabilities? Paying attention to your own vulnerability can be helpful and can help us to get the right tools and get the right perspective in order to respond better. And I think that paying attention to our partner's responsibility, not their responsibility, sorry, their vulnerability is also incredibly and deeply healing when done really well. So here's how that might look, right? So when I hear Becca ask for more romance, more pursuit, more time, instead of feeling inadequate because I didn't give her enough time, or feeling ashamed because, ashamed or inadequate because I just don't feel like we have any time, which we don't. So that's where that feeling comes from. But instead of feeling those inadequacies, I could respond instead more gently to the vulnerability that she's experiencing. Not because that will fix it. Like this isn't quick fix land where you come and get the tools and then you go, it doesn't fix it, but it does update the process over time to understand the vulnerabilities and to respond better. So, right. So we're back to where we were. She's expressing a desire for more time and more romance and more connection and maybe feeling disconnected. And even though I'm not feeling disconnected because my disconnection meter and my disconnection early warning system is not as in tune with hers and not as sensitive as hers, I can respond gently to her request for increased connection and romance and time. So instead of saying, that's a you problem, you are ungrateful for the time that I'm giving you, in order to defend from my shame, because I don't want to feel that, right? Anything to get away from my shame. You're ungrateful. You're not seeing me. You're not seeing what I've done. You're not seeing the energy that I'm giving to work and then also to our children. And I rescued you from the children just early this afternoon. And how can you not feel loved? And how can you not feel connected? May or may not be that I have actually said some of those things. And maybe you have too. Maybe you have felt that deep sense of, oh man, like more? What do you mean more? What do you mean not enough? What do you mean I can't? Maybe you've felt that exacerbation and that exhaustion from being in that position. So instead of going there with my response, when I understand that what she's really bringing to me is her fear and a sense of, am I alone in this? Is Peter going to leave me alone? Is Peter going to leave me alone in my desire to be romanced? Is Peter going to leave me alone in my desire for time? Is Peter going to leave me alone in my desire for connection or communication? When I understand that her request is coming from her vulnerability, then I can update my response to her. So I might say, I didn't realize that you were feeling disconnected. I didn't realize that you were feeling alone. I didn't know that you needed me in that way. And I don't want to leave you alone. And I don't want you to be afraid. And in that softness and in that I see you, I can also make internal choices, maybe even not expressing words to her in that moment, because words often fall way short. For Becca, at least, maybe your spouse is looking for, and then I will do this because I know that I see that isolation and fear is really getting to you. And so maybe calming her with your words, that might be appropriate for you. For me and Becca, I don't think in that moment that I could really say or do anything that would ease that as much. But there are things in my response that I can do to express a connection to her vulnerability rather than a connection to my own need to not feel ashamed and not feel inadequate. So that's the masculine. From the feminine side, when y'all as feminine see your spouse or partner as well-meaning toward you, that they want to connect with you, that they want to help you, that they want you happy, that they want to see you thriving. And you can respond to, you can create your request and express your request in the vein or in the lens or in the verbiage that expresses vulnerability rather than contempt or criticism. And we talk a little bit about those during our second episode on, what makes marriage not the best, like when marriage isn't the best, which is kind of talking about harm and hurt. And the Gottmans have the horsemen. You can go look at the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse from the Gottmans. Actually, just the last episode in 13, we talk about 1,000 conflicts, and the video that's linked in that 1,000 conflicts video talks through some of the horsemen, right? And then the harsh startup. So a lot of these communication dynamics that exist around this fear, shame, inadequacy, isolation pattern. So if you need resources, there's tons of different resources that you can kind of dig deeper into. But also, just like right now, you can update the lens that you're bringing to your partner, which is kind of where I was going before. You can update the lens that you're bringing to your partner. You can express the vulnerabilities rather than an attack. And I'm not going to give you an example because I know you know what that means. You know what that looks like. And you can see it on your spouse, like when they are defeated, when they are deflated, you've hit that shame. You've touched them in a place of inadequacy. And their fear, their feeling is that they don't want to feel ashamed. They want you to think that they are absolutely crushing it. They want you to think that they're the bomb, and that they want you to see them and the work that they're doing and the love that they have and the desire for you to be happy, even though they're failing at it. Like, they want you to see those things. They want you to see how hard they're working. And so if you can couch the terms, if you can bring to them that vulnerability, they're going to be blessed by that. And you may find that they shut down less. You may find that they aren't in that shame and inadequacy part. And you may find that they can respond better to you. This is one of the most difficult dynamics to work on in your marriage, because it's so visceral when you experience this shame and inadequacy, or when you're experiencing the fear and the isolation. The physiology makes a big difference, right? The racing heart, the higher blood pressure, the shortness in your breathing, the dump of cortisol, which is what happens when I think either spouse, either side, the masculine or the feminine, are triggered in the area, in these specific areas. You've just got this cortisol dump. And so you want to be the kind of spouse that can respond in such a way that you're responding to the other's vulnerability, men responding to the fear and the isolation in their spouses, and women responding to the vulnerability of the shame and the inadequacy. When you're able to see each other through the lens of what makes you vulnerable, it equips you to respond differently, to communicate differently, to conflict differently, to connect differently. And this is one of those areas that if you can know your spouse and know their vulnerability, when you can see them in their vulnerability and know their vulnerability and then respond to their vulnerability instead of maybe their imperfect attempts. I have made 1 billion imperfect attempts. And so when we're able to see those imperfect attempts and respond to the vulnerability behind them, again, the satisfaction that you're going to experience, this incredible intimacy that you're going to experience, the feelings of being known, and knowing are going to be greatly blessed, greatly increased over time as you kind of incorporate this part of the system into the way that you communicate and conflict. So if you have any questions on the shame, inadequacy, fear, isolation journey, those vulnerabilities, the entire book, How to Improve Your Marriage Without Talking About It, is really dedicated to training couples to see the vulnerabilities and to respond to them. So if that strikes a chord with you, then I would maybe jump into that and see what you think. When we talked 1,000 conflicts this last time, if you missed that one is a good one to kind of work through your expectations of conflict in your marriage and to update that part of the system. Other sustainable system conversations, right? The 20 minutes to save your marriage. I think that's episode 10. Maybe looking at that and, pursuing some of those more sustainable rhythms that are going to help you to feel more connected and feel more vulnerable and feel more open in some of those things. It's very difficult to see each other's vulnerabilities when you're feeling fully disconnected. And to be honest, our desire to feel, to see the vulnerabilities of our partners when we're not feeling connected is greatly reduced. So there's lots of different system things, lots of different opportunities to update your marriage. And nothing gets updated quickly and nothing is going to be perfect. However, if you're dedicating time and energy and effort to your marriage, which I hope that you are going to see better and better and sweeter fruit over time. And it's really going to be the best. So thank you for your time. Feel free to reach out. Feel free to interact with us if you want to. And we hope that your marriage is continuing to grow and continuing to be blessed. Bye, everybody.